Memory, social influence, sleep and dreaming, and research methods. That makes up paper 2, and that's what we're going to be covering today in our walking talking mock. I'm going to be walking you through a real past paper, breaking down questions, giving you loads of advice about the sort of things you should be writing about in your exam. Let's get straight into it. The absolute best way to make use of this video is to actually give the paper a go first. So I've put the link in the description, a QR code on the screen, download, print out the paper, and if you're feeling brave, time yourself, then come back to the video for your advice and answers. And we're going to get straight into question 1, which is all to do with Wilson et al. Often lots of students forget that Wilson et al. Is Clive Waring. They expect the words Clive Waring to be all over the paper. Now, as you can see, all on this page, there is not one single mention of Clive Waring. So often my students get mixed up and they forget that Wilson et al. Is Clive. So do remember that. It will be referred to as Wilson, Copperman and Kapoor in the real paper. Now, as for question 1, it is a case study. Now, I'm not going to give you exactly the same advice that I gave you on that paper 1 video, which you can check out for sure if you want to have a look at some more bits of advice. However, I'm really hoping that we'll all be able to work out the fact that this is a case study. It's a really in-depth analysis of one individual, in this case Clive, and his problems and why he got these problems. And in that investigation, it involved looking at things like brain scans, IQ tests, observations, interviews with Clive himself, and all sorts. So this is a case study. For number 2, they used MRI scans, so please don't get that confused. I will say I don't think this is too tricky because actually across the entire course, both papers of psychology that you're learning about, you won't really encounter any other brain scans other than SPECT scans in Daniel et al. However, none of the others are mentioned, only MRI, so hopefully we should be able to pick up MRI scans here. And then for the third one, it's low generalizability. Now, this is always an issue with case studies. Case studies are just one person, so we're not really going to be able to generalize to other people around the world, and that's especially true of Clive Waring. What a unique case that not many people around the world will ever come close to experiencing. So how can we generalize the results of Clive's situation to other cases of amnesia? Well, we might not be able to. So that's the main criticism here. Now we come on to question 2, and actually I want to give you a little bit of a task here for the second question. I want you to try and remember this little sequence of letters and numbers here. Try and remember it as well as you can. I'll come back to it in a little bit. It will all make sense. Now on to the next page. For 2A, identify the suggestion that refers to the capacity of short-term memory. A big thing that my students mix up is capacity and duration. So please make sure you get them the right way around. Capacity is all about the amount of information that can be held. Duration is how long we can hold that information for. And so hopefully that brings us to the answer of that she is trying to put too much information into her memory. Remembering to quote the source. I will go on about it a lot in this video as well, but seriously, it is my pet peeve. My students are sick of me talking about it, but lots of students miss out on loads of marks because they don't refer to the source. I'll talk about that even more as we go through the questions. And so that brings me on to how she can increase that capacity. Well, if the capacity of the short-term memory is about 7 plus or minus 2 items, so between 5 or 9 things, that's what we'd say our short-term memory can hold. Well, we can increase that by doing something called chunking. Think about your phone number right now. You probably don't do it as this. You probably do it as something a little bit more like this when you read it out. That's chunking. That's because when you read it out in your head, you're not reading out 11 digits, you're breaking it down into smaller amounts to make it easier to remember. That technique is called chunking, and it improves the capacity of your short-term memory. You do need to know that. So now we come on to 2C. And this is all about something called rehearsal. And rehearsal is the idea that you loop information over and over again in order for information to get from the short-term memory to the long-term memory. This looping information over and over again is called maintenance rehearsal. In fact, do you remember earlier when I gave you a little sequence to remember? Well, can you remember it? How well can you remember it? Some of you might have been repeating it to yourself over and over again. That's using maintenance rehearsal. Looping information over and over again gets information from the short-term memory to the long-term memory, which is something that the multi-store model supports and suggests is the way that we remember things. If you didn't remember it, then maybe you need to give maintenance rehearsal a go. Anyway, that's going to be your first mark, talking about rehearsal and how rehearsal is how information gets from the short-term memory to the long-term memory. And that second mark is for a source mark. So you can see that the question itself says how information will travel from Yasmin's short-term memory to her long-term memory. We're not talking about just a generic example. We've got to talk about Yasmin here. Now, question 3, evaluate the multi-store model of memory. I actually think this is a lovely question. There's lots to talk about here, and especially when we see evaluate a theory, my go-to would be reductionism. I'm not going to say that all theories are reductionist, but the vast majority of theories that we talk about in psychology are. So just a little bit of a tip for you. If you ever get a question that involves evaluating a theory, a pretty solid bet a lot of the time is reductionism. Not every time. Often there are better criticisms, but if you're having a bit of a moment in the exam, you forget what to write, reductionism is a good bet. Now, how do we actually use reductionism though? Because I see a lot of my students using this kind of sentence in my exams, and that's costing them a lot of marks. So what's wrong with it? Well, you can see that they're not being specific enough. There's not enough information here that suggests that they actually understand a problem with the multi-store model itself. Technically, we could be talking about any theory with this kind of sentence. So here's a little template for you. If I was you, I'd try my absolute best to memorize this little template and fill in the words that you need when it comes to any sort of theory. This means that, especially because 90% of the theories are reductionist, if you can remember this template, get the right words in, and then come out with that reductionism example done properly, you're going to get yourself loads of marks in the exam, because often it's applicable in almost every year, every exam. Now, for 4 marks, I'd be giving a second criticism just to make sure that we're getting the marks. And the easiest one for the multi-store model is the idea that actually it doesn't take meaning into account. What I mean by that is it's not taking into account stuff that means a lot to you, which you also remember. It just says that in order for you to remember stuff, you have to repeat it over and over again. But what about those really special events, those special days that mean a lot to you? You didn't have to rehearse those, but you still remember that. So that's a bit of a criticism of the theory. Now, page 4 includes question 4 and 5. And actually, this is like an absolute heavenly page for most students because we've got a word fill, we've got a little key term match. So stuff like this is great. It's easy marks most of the time. Let's just make sure that we know our key terms in order to get this done. I've popped the answers on the screen for you, so hopefully that's going to make a load of sense. And you can see that there's quite a bit about neuropsychology. It is a tricky part, but every single year, every paper has at least one question on neuropsychology. It's just a bit of a trend. OCR really like to make sure that the students understand a little bit about the brain, about the topics that they're learning. Now, I know this is the toughest bit, so I am working on getting as many videos out there for you as I can, and at some point I do have a full neuropsychology video planned. Question 6 then involves looking at the other theory, the theory of reconstructive memory, which actually goes against the multi-store model. The multi-store model says that our memories are fixed, they're like a camera, right? You point, you shoot, you record, and you store those memories. Whereas the theory of reconstructive memory says that our memories are really inaccurate, they're very unreliable, we shouldn't trust them. And on that note, for question 6a, I would go for confabulation. This is a little bit like when you make things up, not necessarily that you're lying or not making things up on purpose, but it's when your brain fills in the gaps of your memories when it doesn't know what actually happened there. This is called confabulation, and it's something that the theory of reconstructive memory says that is a way that our memories are unreliable. Now again, I am going to rush through the maths question, and that's just because I do have kind of a dedicated maths video coming out soon, hopefully, and that's going to be all to do with the maths in psychology. But for now, the answers are on the screen. And then to finish off the memory section, we're talking about questions 7 and 8. Question 7 being about describing a criticism of the theory of reconstructive memory. Well, why don't we put that little template to the test? It might be worth you pausing the video, grabbing a piece of paper and giving it a go first. Try and tell me why the theory of reconstructive memory is reductionist using the template that we came up with earlier. I'll give you a few seconds to pause the video. Otherwise, this is the kind of thing that I was after. So using that template, you can see that we've just inserted some of those keywords in there, and we've got ourselves a fantastic answer for both marks. Realistically, this template would get you up to 3 marks in a criticism question. And actually, it could be used in paper 1 and paper 2, as long as you're talking about a criticism of a theory that is reductionist. For question 8, we're talking about how neurological tests have helped us to have a better understanding of memory. And so specifically, I'd be identifying a memory problem like amnesia, and I'd be saying that something like the Western Memory Scale has been used in order to determine the extent of their damage compared to people who maybe don't have damaged memories. Now let's move straight into section B, sleep and dreaming. And so it's really important that we're getting manifest and latent content the right way around. The thing that is the actual subject matter of dreams, according to Freud, is the manifest content. The things that you manifest, the things that you think about, that is the actual content of the dream. And so if I was to dream that I was an Olympic runner, and Freud might suggest that that means I want to run away from my current life, then the manifest content there would be the Olympic runner dream, and the running away from my current life would be the symbol, what we call the latent content. I will at some point do a full video on Freud, and when I do, you'll see that it's basically a big key term list. If you can remember the key terms for Freud, and they're the ones that are listed on the spec, then you should be okay with many of the questions on the Freudian theory. Now for question B, we do have to have a little bit more of an understanding than just the key terms. We have to have an understanding that Freud says that that idea of repression, that is when we push down a really negative thought into the unconscious. And so the answer here is D, pushing unpleasant experiences into the unconscious. Finally, for C, every time you are asked to criticize the Freudian theory of dreaming, I would always go for the idea that it is very subjective. I don't know how your teachers have maybe taught you guys about the Freudian theory, but whenever I teach it, I think I always have quite a bit of fun with my students because it is absolutely bonkers. And so because of that, I think students really grasp the idea that actually the Freudian theory isn't very scientific. It's pretty much up to opinion. It's actually a really common thing that I get asked. How did Freud know all this? How did he come up with this idea of what Pangev thought about the wolves on the tree? Well, he didn't. He kind of guessed. He came up with it himself, right? And that means that it's subjective. I'm going to breeze past A, B, and C because I feel like these little one markers, they just rely on us knowing the source and knowing some of the key terms. And so the answers are on the screen. However, just to note, maintenance insomnia means when we are unable to remain asleep. So compared to onset insomnia, which is we can't get to sleep, maintenance insomnia is when you keep waking up over and over again at night. Now, as for the benefits of sleep, there are 3 that you need to know. These are physical repair, healthy brain, and emotional stability. And because the question says explain, we can't just name it, we actually have to talk a little bit about each of them. And so a really easy one to talk about would be emotional stability. I think we've all had those moments where we're unable to sleep, we wake up the next day after 3 hours of sleep and we'll feel horrible and grumpy. And so I think that's a really easy one to talk about, just saying that not being able to sleep causes problems with our emotional stability, and this might lead to us becoming agitated or irritable. Do note you could talk about the other 2 as well. I just feel like emotional stability is the easiest one. Now for F, we're talking about an open question. And now this brings in a little bit of research methods. Now when it comes to an open question, I'll cycle through a few different ones that you could use here, but you can notice that all of them allow the participant to actually give longer answers, to really extend their answers and talk about a wide variety of things, rather than just a yes or no response or a closed amount of answers, such as how old are you? Well, that's only going to provide one small answer, a small word or 2. Whereas in reality, we want long extended sentences for an open question. Now, question 11, outlining the role of melatonin in sleep. I'm going to show you a little chart that I tend to use when I teach my students this. And this is kind of a little flow diagram that I would try and memorize if I was you guys. And you can see that if you can remember this flow diagram, you can remember exactly how we get to sleep. As I say, don't worry too much about the rest of the diagram. At some point, I'll explain it fully in a video. But for now, just understand that what melatonin does, it is a hormone that puts us to sleep. So our body's endocrine system, our body's natural hormone system, it releases melatonin when we get sleepy or when it gets dark outside, and that makes us extra sleepy and puts us to sleep. Now, we get on to question 12. Please remember the word neuropsychology always means sort of a biological answer. And so what we're talking about here are 3 parts of the brain for the activation synthesis theory. So the 3 parts of the brain are the pons, the cerebral cortex, and the limbic system. I'll put up a model answer on the screen now. You can see that what we're talking about with the activation synthesis theory is a much more scientific explanation of dreaming, unlike Freud, and it includes the idea that the pons sends random activation across the brain, specifically the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex interprets these as real sensations. The limbic system also interprets them as real sensations. This leads to very emotional dreams where you can feel the sensations of the dream. And then we come on to a 6th marker, which involves evaluating the activation synthesis theory. And well, if we're evaluating a theory, why not use that template earlier that I gave you? Again, I'll give you a few seconds to pause the video, but it would be great to see you trying to give this a go first. Now that you've given it a go, you can see that 2, probably 3 of those marks are already covered through reductionism. So let's finish off the answer. Now this is one where actually I talk about a positive. It's very rare that we talk about positives at GCSE psychology. We tend to focus mainly on the criticisms, but in this case, a great positive is that it's a lot more scientific than the Freudian theory, and I'd be using that as my second point. The Freudian theory is very subjective, it's not very scientific, it's not really based on anything at all, whereas the activation synthesis theory is like really scientific. And that rounds off section B, which is sleep and dreaming, and takes us straight into social influence. And again, we've got these multiple choice questions. 14A is a little bit weird. I find it strange that they'd ask you a question specifically about where a study was from, but nice that we know that they can do that. So do keep an eye out for that in future lessons. It might be worth you having a look at where certain studies took place and see if you can try and learn that as part of your revision. Now, the type of sampling used by Bickman is an opportunity sample. This is because he just took to the streets of New York, found the first people that he could to do his little experiment on, his field experiment, and he did it. So that's called an opportunity sample. And then for C, there's something really important you need to look out for. The answer here is C, which is civilian, milkman, and guard. However, often students do get mixed up with the guard with a policeman, and that means that they're going to miss out on some marks. So please do make sure you understand that it's a guard, not a policeman. I presume he did this because it's against the law to impersonate a police officer. Don't know if that's the case, but if that helps you to remember it, then please do. Okay, question 15, and we're on to situational factors. Explain one way in which how culture might affect pro-social behavior. And for this, you need to understand two key terms: individualistic versus collectivist cultures. Individualistic cultures are cultures like ours. They can be a little bit selfish. We tend to do our own thing. We tend to have our own goals, our own focus, and we don't tend to be too community driven. Collectivist cultures tend to be what we consider Eastern cultures. So these are cultures that maybe have a huge emphasis on the community. They help each other a lot. That would be a collectivist culture. And so all you need to remember for a question like this is the idea that a collectivist culture is more likely to demonstrate pro-social behavior, whereas a individualistic culture is more likely to show anti-social behavior. If you can remember that, get that into an answer such as what's on the screen now, and you've got yourself both marks. Question 16, source-based question. As we know, we need to be referring to the source always in order to make sure we're getting those marks. Now here, we have a really important thing we need to distinguish, because almost every year there's some sort of question that might crop students up based on conformity and obedience. So please make sure you know the differences between the two. Conformity is when you have some sort of pressure from people around you to do something. An example of conformity would be that you go to a party and let's say you're wearing jeans and everyone else is wearing cargos. Now, if that's the case, then you might feel a little bit awkward. You might feel like you want to go and get changed. And that would be conformity, especially if you do go get changed. That's conformity. You're fitting in with the majority. Maybe no one said anything to you. Maybe they don't even think about it. But due to either real or perceived pressure, you're conforming to the majority. You're doing whatever everyone else is doing. If someone went up to you and went, "Why are you wearing jeans? Why are you not wearing cargos?" And then they go put on some cargos, and you go and do it, that's called obedience. You're being told what to do and you do it. So you really need to be able to distinguish between those two key terms. It's really important because often every year it comes up as some sort of example. And actually that leads on nicely to question 17, which asks us to compare conformity and crowd behavior. To make it really simple, conformity is where you fall under the pressure of some people around you for whatever reason, whereas crowd behavior is you've gone into a large gathering of people. For example, you've gone to a shopping center and you're all there for different reasons, but maybe your behavior might change, it might stay the same, but regardless, it's your behavior when in a large crowd, a large situation. Conformity is simply where you change your behavior because of real or perceived pressure. So that would be my answer for number 17. Question 18, another source-based question. As soon as we see a source, we can be quite comfortable in the idea that for 2 marks, we need to be trying to use at least one of those marks for referring to the source. So in this case, I'd be talking about Mohammed and Jordana in my answer. And so what am I talking about here? Well, minority influence is when the smaller group affects the bigger group. And so in this answer, I'd be using one of 3 things. And this is always the case. When you talk about minority influence, these are the 3 things you must talk about: consistency, commitment, and persuasiveness. Consistency is, are they consistent in their message? Are they delivering the same message over and over again? Commitment are, how committed are they to the cause? Are they really determined to make sure that their cause, their opinions are the ones that kind of manage to get across? And then finally, we have persuasiveness. And the easiest way to demonstrate persuasiveness is to have what we call a charismatic leader. So somebody who is really passionate, somebody who is really popular to lead the way in terms of your argument. And actually, that's what I would use for this one. I would say that Mohammed and Jordana should have a charismatic leader come in and do some sort of speech to the school to try and improve mental health stigma. Regardless, if you ever get a question that's about minority influence and improving minority influence, you talk about consistency, commitment, and persuasiveness. One of those 3 is going to get you the marks. Okay, now we get onto the 13 marker. If you need any extra help with the 13 marker, I've got 2 places you can go on my channel. I have a full 13 marker guide that you can check out, and I also broke down an entire 13 marker with 2 possible answers in my paper 1 walking talking mock. And if this video so far has been really helpful, it's definitely worth you sharing it with any classmates that also might find it helpful. Also, if you like and subscribe, it shows me that it's been really helpful, and also it helps you guys to not miss another video in the future to get yourself the best possible grade in your exam. Okay, now onto this 13 marker, and I actually think it's quite a nice one to an extent. Quite like Bigman. I think Bigman's quite a nice one to talk about, and here we're talking about quantitative and qualitative data. Hopefully we'll be able to work out straight away that Bigman is quantitative data. So in my head, I'd be thinking to myself, okay, well, I've got to think about something that's qualitative data to counter Bigman's study. Now, as I say, because I've already done a couple of videos on 13 markers, I'm not going to cover it in too much detail here. I'm just going to quickly fly through a sort of plan that I would talk about. So for my first A1 paragraph, it would be describing Bigman, especially referring referring to how they use quantitative data in their study. My AO3 would then be talking about the strengths and weaknesses of this. Specifically, I'd be saying that a great strength of quantitative data is the easy ability to compare bits of data together. So by using percentages, saying that 60% of people obeyed with this person compared to 30% of people with that person, we can quite clearly see that there's a massive amount more people obeying to this person than that person. And that finishes off the first half of the essay. The second half of the essay then has to bring in an alternative theory, an opposing theory, something a bit different. So what would I talk about? Well, I'd be bringing in something like a case study. Clive Waring would be a very good one, or Wolfman, the case study of the Wolfman. That's because they're very solid, nailed on qualitative bits of data. Now, I'd probably use Wolfman, and that's because the Wolfman study has a lot of qualitative data, and it's purely qualitative data. It's just a big analysis of a dream. So that would be my AO1 paragraph of that half. It would be talking about Wolfman's study in terms of what they actually spoke about. My AO3 would then be discussing a strength and weakness of the use of qualitative data in that study. Now, the big weakness of anything Freudian, as I mentioned earlier, is the idea of subjectivity. The idea that actually anything that Freud said was pretty subjective. There wasn't too much scientific nature into a lot of the things that he was talking about. And so in order to link this to the idea of qualitative data, I'd be saying that because Freud used qualitative data, because it wasn't numerical, it was much less scientific, it was much more subjective, because he was just analyzing a dream extract. It's not going to be the most scientific thing ever. And so that brings me on to a nice little weakness of qualitative data. Finally, a little conclusion, and it rounds off the 13 marker nicely. As I say, I've gone through it quite quickly. You could quite easily do one based on Clive Waring for the second half instead. However, I do think Wolfman would be just about the better one here. As I said before, if you need more help with the 13 markers, I have a dedicated 13 marker help video that is on the channel. Finally, we're going to get onto research methods. Please remember my massive top tip from paper 1, which is that you should be referring to this source in pretty much every answer in this topic. Please remember. Question 20 then gets you to identify a suitable hypothesis. Now, straight away, we can knock off number 2, and that's because it talks about a relationship. Please remember, if you ever see the word relationship, it's on about a correlation. And likewise, if you ever get a question about a correlation and it asks you to write a hypothesis, you should be using the word relationship. However, in this case, it isn't a correlation. We're talking about an experiment here. And we know that because there's an independent variable here, which is what kind of headgear that they wore. Therefore, we can safely assume that it's an experiment. Now, seeing as though it's an experiment, it's not a correlation, we can rule out number 2. That then leaves us between number 1 and number 3. Now, it's not number 1, and the reason for that is because number 1 says there will be no difference. However, the question's asking you to find an alternative hypothesis. Now, there are 2 types of hypothesis: alternative hypothesis and null hypothesis. A null hypothesis is there will be no significant difference, whereas an alternative hypothesis is there will be a significant difference. Again, if you ever get asked to write a hypothesis, I would always start with those words. There will be a significant difference between, or if you get asked to write a null hypothesis, there will be no significant difference between. Next, we'll come on to 21, and I have an amazing bit of advice for you here. If you ever get a question that tasks you with coming up with your own sample and asks you how you would collect that sample, if you get the option to go for self-selected, go for it, because a mark will always be given to you if you say that you would collect a self-selected sample by putting up posters with your information on for people to step forward. Please don't make the mistake that I see all the time, which is that students will say, I'd go in a room and I'd get them all to put their hands up. That wouldn't work, unfortunately. You wouldn't get marks for that. It's not a proper self-selected sample. To get a self-selected sample, people have to volunteer themselves, step forward for it. And the best way to do that in the realms of the research methods sections that we have to answer in our exams is to put up posters around wherever it is that the source tells you, and to put your contact details on the poster for people to then contact you if they're interested. Therefore, people will self-select themselves for the study. Again, use the source. So in this case, we've got to make sure we're talking about the workplace. And so a model answer would look something like this. And the great thing with self-selected is it also has a really easy strength, which is actually the next question. The strength of a self-selected sample is that we can talk about ethics. A strength of a self-selected sample is that it's really ethical. People have stepped forward for this study. They're not getting forced into it. And again, remembering the words in this study. So it's not good enough just to give me a generic strength. You've got to make sure you're linking it to the workplace, to headgear, whatever. In fact, just on that point, I would definitely be highlighting 2 or 3 key terms in that source and then coming back to those 2 or 3 words in every single answer. In this case, I'd be doing workplace, headgear, and risk-taking. There are 3 amazing words from the source that I'd be trying to use in almost every answer. For number 22, we're talking about validity. On your course, you need to know about 3 types of validity: ecological validity, population validity, and construct validity. And actually, ecological validity is probably the one I'd go for here. The reason for that is because ecological validity is how accurate to real life a study is. So is that study actually demonstrating what risk-taking behaviors would look like in real life? Well, probably not. And so that's your answer here. It has low ecological validity because playing a risk-taking video game isn't going to be representative of the kind of behaviors that you might demonstrate in real life. So yeah, fair enough. In a video game, you might take risks, you might do something a bit extreme, but in real life, you might not take those same risks. That means it has low ecological validity. We can't apply the results to real life. Question 22, I think probably the trickiest question here, and that's because students really struggle with the concept of reliability. Firstly, if you ever see a question about reliability, I'd definitely be thinking about using the words repeatable in that response. And if we're talking about internal reliability, I would always use the word standardized or standardization or standardized procedure. What do I mean by that? Well, in this study, it wouldn't really make sense if the baseball cap that they chose was different, if there were different types of baseball caps used. Or it wouldn't make sense if all the participants played a different risk-taking game. Again, this wouldn't be very reliable because we're repeating it in a different way. It's not very reliable at all. So what's the answer here? Well, internal reliability is achieved by making sure that the participants get a very consistent and similar experience. And we can improve that by making sure that there is a standardized procedure. That means that every participant goes through a roughly very similar procedure. And for the second mark, we've got to make sure we're linking to the source. It does say in this study. So specifically mentioning workplace, risk-taking, headgear, anything like that is going to get yourself that final mark. For question 24, look at this. Again, it's saying in this study, so we know it's going to be at least one source mark. And it's only a 2 marker, so we only need 1 mark's worth of a strength. So a strength for collecting primary data is that because we've collected the data ourselves, we can trust that the data hasn't been misrepresented by anyone else and that it's actually true to what I've recorded. So that's going to be a strength, and specifically talking about the fact that we're recording risk-taking behavior is going to get yourself the 2nd mark. Again, linking to the source. Have you seen just how many source marks there are in this part so far? Imagine if you didn't know about using the source or you didn't bother using the source, you'd be losing so many marks. I mean, it's definitely a grade boundaries worth. Now for question 25, I don't want to go into too much detail about drawing graphs because again, that will all come in a full-on research methods video. However, again, just like I said in the first walking talking mock video, I did explain that with these, it is so important that you're getting a title down and you're labeling your axes correctly. Actually, in this specific question, only 1 mark is for correctly plotting any data. That means 2 marks, 1 is for a title and 1 is for your axis. I mean, I find that absolutely mind-blowing and some amazing easy marks to get. It means you can mess up on the data completely and still be confident you're going to get something out of a question like this. Often they're 4 markers, not 3 markers, so it's even better. And then finally, we come right to the end. Question 26, it's all about conclusions. And actually, you have to make sure you have an understanding of the difference between results and conclusions. If a question asks you to talk about results, then you're talking about actual findings, percentages, numbers. If you're talking about conclusions, it's what we can learn from those numbers. To give you an unrelated example, we found in Bickman's study that 82% of people obeyed the guard when they were asked to pick up the paper bag off the floor. This is compared to just 36% when a civilian asked people to do the same thing. Therefore, everything I've just given you is a result, right? It's a finding. I've told you a percentage, I've told you what we found from the study. If I want to tell you a conclusion, we could conclude that people are more likely to obey somebody in a guard outfit compared to somebody dressed in a civilian outfit, especially when picking up a paper bag off the floor. That's a conclusion. So let's bring it back to this question, because one of the important things you need to understand is, from the perspective of a research methods section, you need to make sure that you give a conclusion and you support it with some findings, with some sort of result. So a great answer would be the following. Do you see how I've used some statistics in there to support my conclusion? Well, we need to give 2 conclusions here, and with that, we finish up our paper 2 full exam walkthrough. Now, I'm really hoping this has been super helpful for you. I wish you absolutely all the best of luck in your exams. Please leave a comment if you have any questions about anything. I'm more than happy to help. Otherwise, a like and subscribe goes such a long way to show me that the video has been really helpful. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video.